Imagine standing on the dusty cliffs of Algeciras in the summer of 1942. The Spanish sun is relentless, baking the limestone. You look across the bay toward the Rock of Gibraltar, the gateway to the Mediterranean, the immovable anchor of the British Empire. You expect to see the white ensign of the Royal Navy patrolling the straits, but the water is empty. You look up to the summit of the rock and your blood runs cold. The Union Jack is gone. In its place, flying triumphantly from the highest signal station, is a massive swastika, visible for miles. Below, the harbor is a graveyard. The twisted hull of a British aircraft carrier smolders in the oil-slicked water. German Stuka dive bombers scream overhead, using the rock as a forward operating base to hunt convoys deep in the Atlantic. The Mediterranean is sealed. The Suez Canal is cut. The lifeline to India, to oil, to survival has been severed. Britain is not fighting for victory anymore. It is fighting against starvation. This nightmare scenario didn't require a miracle weapon or a new tank. It didn't require a successful invasion of London. It only required one man to say yes instead of no. This is the story of Operation Felix and the death of the British Empire. Is 3:20 p.m. on October 23, 1940. The location is the small, nondescript railway station of Hendaye, sitting precisely on the border between German-occupied France and neutral Spain. The air is thick with the smell of coal smoke and nervous sweat. A massive armored train pulls into the station. This is the Amerika, Hitler's mobile headquarters. The German Führer steps onto the platform, confident and impatient. He is the master of Europe. Poland, Norway, Denmark, Belgium, Holland, and France have all fallen in barely a year. The British army has been kicked off the continent at Dunkirk. To Hitler, the war is practically won. He just needs to land the final blow. Waiting for him is a much smaller man, dressed in a general's uniform with a red sash around his waist. Francisco Franco, the caudillo of Spain. He is short, soft-spoken, and notoriously impossible to read. But standing right next to him is the man who matters most to our story today, Ramon Serrano Suñer. Suñer is Franco's brother-in-law and Spain's foreign minister. He is an ardent fascist, a man who despises Western democracy and idolizes the efficient brutality of the Nazi machine. He has spent the last month in Berlin, whispering in ears, laying the groundwork for this very moment. Suñer wants Spain in the war. He believes the Axis victory is inevitable, and he wants Spain to be at the table to carve up the spoils of the British Empire. History often remembers this meeting as a non-starter, a moment where Franco simply refused to budge, but that is a comfortable myth we tell ourselves. The truth is far more dangerous. Franco didn't come to Hendaye to say no. He came to negotiate a price for yes. The atmosphere inside the train car is suffocating. Hitler lays out his vision. The British are stubborn, but if they lose the Mediterranean, they lose their empire. He proposes Operation Felix, a swift German march through Spain to seize Gibraltar. He offers Gibraltar to Spain as the prize. Franco nods. He wants Gibraltar. It is the obsession of Spanish nationalism, the thorn in the foot of the peninsula. But Franco is a survivor. He looks at his own country, shattered by 3 years of a brutal civil war. His people are starving. The infrastructure is broken. He cannot fight a long war. So he puts his demands on the table. They are staggering. First, Spain needs food, hundreds of thousands of tons of grain to prevent famine. Second, they need fuel. But third, and most critical, Franco demands territory. He doesn't just want Gibraltar, he wants the entirety of French Morocco. He wants the city of Oran in Algeria. He wants to resurrect the Spanish Empire in North Africa. This is the friction point. Not morality, not neutrality, real estate. Hitler is trapped in a diplomatic box of his own making. He has just met with Pierre Laval of Vichy, France. Hitler believes he needs the collaboration of the French to keep Europe stable. If he gives French Morocco to Spain, the French colonies might rebel and join the British and de Gaulle. Hitler tries to dazzle Franco with talk of glory and the defeat of England. Franco, speaking in a high-pitched, droning monotone, simply circles back to the map. What about Morocco? What about the wheat? The meeting drags on for 9 agonizing hours. At one point, Hitler storms out, muttering to his interpreter, Paul Schmidt, that he would rather have 3 or 4 teeth pulled to talk to Franco again. But let's be clear, this wasn't a rejection of ideology. It was a failed business deal. Franco was ready to sign. Sugnère was begging him to sign. The only thing stopping the Wehrmacht from rolling into Madrid that winter was a disagreement over colonial borders in Africa. Hitler left Hendaye disgusted, believing he could win the war without Spain. He thought he could bomb Britain into submission or starve them out with U-boats. He was wrong. But what if he had been smarter? What if he had realized that the French colonies were worthless compared to the strategic value of locking the Mediterranean? This is where the history we know begins to crack. Because back in Berlin, the German military planners weren't waiting for a handshake. They were already moving divisions to the border. They had a plan, and it was terrifyingly detailed. While Hitler and Franco were locked in their railway stalemate, a different kind of German officer had already been on the ground in Spain for months. His name was Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, the head of the Abwehr, German military intelligence. In July 1940, disguised as a civilian tourist, Canaris traveled to Algeciras. He stood on the balcony of his hotel, peering through binoculars at the Rock of Gibraltar just a few miles away. He wasn't looking at the scenery, he was counting gun emplacements, he was calculating firing arcs. He returned to Berlin with a simple message: the Rock is formidable, but it is not invincible. On November 12, 1940, just weeks after the failure at Hendaye, Hitler signed Führer Directive No. 18. This is the smoking gun of our story. It wasn't a what-if scenario scribbled on a napkin. It was a fully operational war order. The plan was codenamed Operation Felix. General Franz Halder, the chief of the General Staff, had assembled a force designed to crack the fortress open like a walnut. The assault force would be the 49th Mountain Army Corps, led by General Ludwig Kübler. These weren't conscripts, they were the Gebirgsjäger, elite mountain troops who had already proven themselves in the snowy peaks of Norway. They were climbers, specialized in vertical warfare. Backing them up was the motorized Grossdeutschland Infantry Regiment and a terrifying arsenal of heavy artillery. The Germans planned to secretly move 167 heavy siege guns through Spain. These included massive 300mm mortars and railway guns capable of smashing the British fortifications from the safety of the Spanish hills. The Luftwaffe was ready too. Dive bomber wings, Sturzkampfgeschwader, were put on alert. Their job was to hammer the British fleet in the harbor, sinking any ship that tried to reinforce the garrison or evacuate the civilians. The timeline was set. The German troops would cross the Pyrenees on January 10, 1941. The attack on Gibraltar would commence on February 4th. The British intelligence services were in a panic. Prime Minister Winston Churchill knew the truth. If the Germans attacked from the land side, Gibraltar was doomed. The fortress was designed to fight ships at sea, not a modern army knocking at the back door. The airfield, the only lifeline, was completely exposed to Spanish artillery. Everything was in place. The maps were drawn, the trains were scheduled, the soldiers were drilling. The only thing missing was Franco's signature. In our timeline, that signature never came. Hitler got distracted by Russia. Franco got cold feet. The moment passed. But history is fragile. It turns on human decisions, not destiny. And in this timeline, the frustration at Hendaye plays out differently. The logic of war overrides the logic of ego. Let's go back to that train car. Let's change one sentence. Let's watch the world burn. We are back in the suffocating warmth of the America train car at Hendaye. The time is 6 p.m. The negotiations have stalled. Franco has just reiterated his demand for French Morocco. In the real timeline, Hitler stood up, his patience exhausted, and declared the demands impossible because they would alienate Vichy France. He walked away, preserving a fragile French collaboration, but losing the strategic key to the war. But in this timeline, Hitler pauses. He looks at the map spread across the oak table. He sees the Mediterranean. He sees the Suez Canal. He realizes that Pétain and the Vichy French are weak, broken allies. Their loyalty is fleeting. But Gibraltar? Gibraltar is a fortress that controls the world's oceans. Hitler turns to his foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, and whispers a single command in German, Gebt es ihm. Hitler turns back to Franco. His face transforms from frustration to a predatory smile. Agreed, he says. We will guarantee Spain's claim to French Morocco. The new order in Africa will belong to Spain. The silence in the car is absolute. Franco blinks. He expected rejection. He expected to go back to Madrid and play for time. But his bluff has been called. The offer is on the table. The food, the fuel, the territory, and the glory. Ramon Serrano Suñer, standing in the corner, can barely contain his excitement. He steps forward, sliding the secret protocol across the table. Franco hesitates for a second, the caution of an old survivor flickering in his eyes. He knows this means war with Britain. He knows the Royal Navy will blockade his ports immediately. But the promise of a new Spanish empire is too intoxicating. The pride of reclaiming Gibraltar is too strong. He picks up the pen. The scratching sound of the nib on the paper is quiet, almost imperceptible. But as he signs Francisco Franco Bahamonde, the sound echoes like a thunderclap across Europe. It is the sound of the Mediterranean slamming shut. The handshake that follows is photographed by a single German press officer. The flashbulb pops, freezing the moment, Hitler gripping Franco's hand, both men smiling. That photo will be on the front page of every newspaper in the world the next morning. In London, Winston Churchill is woken at 2 a.m. by a frantic aide. The telegram from the British ambassador in Madrid is short and catastrophic. Hendaye agreement signed. Spain has joined the Axis. The road to Gibraltar is open. Churchill drops the paper. He pours a brandy, his hand shaking slightly. He knows what comes next. The soft underbelly of Europe has just become an iron wall. The consequences of that signature move faster than anyone expected. Hitler doesn't wait for the ink to dry. On January 10, 1941, the world changes. It begins at the chaotic border crossing of Irun on the Bidasoa River. For months, this bridge has been a place of refugees fleeing the Nazis. But this morning, the flow reverses. At dawn, the Spanish border guards lift the red and yellow barriers. They don't aim their rifles, they salute. A low rumble vibrates through the ground, shaking the windows of the border town. Then, the first German motorcycle sidecars roar across the bridge, followed by the armored half-tracks of the Großdeutschland regiment. The swastika flies alongside the Spanish flag. This is the start of the Gray Tsunami. The logistics are staggering. The Spanish rail network is incompatible with European gauges, and the roads are primitive dirt tracks. But the German war machine is nothing if not efficient. Thousands of Organization Todt engineers flood into Spain, reinforcing bridges and widening roads. Behind the infantry comes the true terror. Covered in tarpaulins, moving only at night to avoid British reconnaissance planes, are the monsters of the German arsenal, the 600mm Karl Garret siege mortars. These are tracked beasts, firing shells the size of a car, designed to smash concrete bunkers into dust. They are heading south, toward the limestone cliffs of Andalusia. In Madrid, the atmosphere is manic. Phalangist crowds fill the streets, chanting Gibraltar Español. German officers in gray uniforms sip coffee in the cafes of the Gran Via, treating Spain not as a conquered nation, but as a staging ground. The British embassy in Madrid is burning documents. The smoke pours from the chimneys day and night. The staff knows they have hours to leave before the declaration of war is official. But the most terrifying scene is unfolding 400 miles south at the border town of La Línea, right next to Gibraltar. The British sentries on the north front of the rock look through their scopes. For 200 years, the land beyond the fence has been sleepy Spanish farmland. But now they see movement. They see dust clouds. They see the glint of optics in the hills. The Spanish civilians are being evacuated from the border zone. In their place, men in field gray uniforms are digging in. They are setting up rangefinders. They are unlimbering 88mm anti-aircraft guns. The realization hits the British garrison commander, General Mason McFarlane, like a physical blow. The siege isn't coming from the sea, where the Royal Navy can fight. It's coming from the land, and he is on the wrong side of the fence. On January 20th, the first German reconnaissance plane flies high over the rock, taking photos. The British anti-aircraft guns stay silent, waiting for orders that are too slow to come. The trap has snapped shut. Operation Felix is a go. The morning of February 4th, 1941, does not bring the sunrise. It brings thunder. At 600 hours, 65 heavy German artillery batteries open fire simultaneously from the Spanish hills. The sound is not a roar. It is a physical pressure wave that cracks windows in Algeciras, 5 miles away. The first targets are not the bunkers, but the airfield. The single runway at Gibraltar, built on reclaimed land jutting into the bay, is the garrison's only umbilical cord to the outside world. Within 20 minutes, it is a cratered moonscape. A squadron of Hurricanes attempting to scramble is destroyed on the tarmac, their fuel tanks turning into pillars of black smoke that choke the harbor. Then come the Stukas. The Ju-87 dive bombers scream down from 10,000 feet unopposed. They target the harbor. The Royal Navy's Force H, including the aircraft carrier HMS Ark Royal and the battlecruiser HMS Renown, is trapped in a deadly shooting gallery. They cannot maneuver in the tight confines of the port. Admiral Somerville, commanding Force H, makes a desperate decision. He signals the fleet, scattered to the Atlantic, abandon the rock. It is a heart-wrenching order. As the great gray ships limp out of the harbor under heavy fire, the garrison soldiers watching from the cliffs realize they are being left behind. They are alone.
For 3 days, the shelling is relentless. The Karl mortars fire 600-millimeter shells that penetrate deep into the limestone rock, collapsing the famous tunnels where the British command centers are hidden. The dust inside the galleries is blinding. The water cisterns crack. On February 7th, the ground assault begins. General Kubler's Gebirgsjäger do not charge blindly. They use smoke screens and flamethrowers to neutralize the British pillboxes on the north front. But their main attack is vertical. Using climbing ropes and pitons, elite squads scale the sheer outcome of the rock face in the dead of night, bypassing the heavy guns pointing north.
By dawn on February 8th, the swastika is draped over the Moorish castle. The fighting in the narrow streets of Gibraltar town is brutal, hand-to-hand combat, but the outcome is inimitable. The British are out of ammo, out of water, and cut off from the sea. At 1400 hours, General Mason McFarland surrenders. For the first time since 1704, the Rock of Gibraltar is in enemy hands. The news hits London like a funeral bell. But the fall of the rock is just the first domino. The real catastrophe is what happens next. The cork has been put in the bottle. The Mediterranean is no longer a sea, it is an Axis lake. With Gibraltar gone, the strategic map of World War II collapses overnight. The most immediate victim is the island of Malta. Sitting alone in the center of the Mediterranean, Malta was the unsinkable aircraft carrier that plagued Axis shipping. In real history, it survived because of desperate convoys fighting through the Straits of Gibraltar. Now, those straits are closed. There are no more convoys, no more fuel tankers, no more Spitfires flying in off carriers. Malta is strangled. The Luftwaffe, operating freely from Sicily and now protected by Spanish airfields to the west, pounds the island into dust. By April 1941, the food is gone, the ammunition is gone. The governor of Malta has no choice. He surrenders the island to prevent the starvation of the civilian population. The fall of Malta removes the last obstacle for the man waiting in Tripoli, Erwin Rommel. In our timeline, Rommel's Africa Corps was always starved of fuel because British submarines from Malta sank his supply ships. He was a master tactician fighting with one hand tied behind his back. In this timeline, the shackles are off. Axis convoys from Italy to North Africa now run uninterrupted day and night. Tanks, trucks, and most importantly, gasoline flood into Tripoli. Rommel doesn't just get a few divisions, he gets an army. The Desert Fox launches his offensive in March 1941, not as a probe, but as a blitzkrieg. He smashes through the British defenses at El Akela. He bypasses Tobruk, leaving it to wither on the vine. There is no stopping him. The British Eighth Army, demoralized and outgunned, retreats in disarray. By May 1941, German panzers are rolling through the streets of Alexandria. The Royal Navy evacuates its remaining ships to the Red Sea, abandoning the Mediterranean entirely.
The prize is Cairo. The prize is the Suez Canal. As Rommel stands on the banks of the Suez, looking east toward the oil fields of the Middle East, he sends a telegram to Berlin. The canal is ours. The British Empire has been severed. The consequences are global. Turkey, seeing the wind blow, signs a non-aggression pact with Germany. Spain occupies French Morocco, fulfilling Franco's dream. The Mediterranean is sealed at both ends, Gibraltar in the west, Suez in the east. Europe has become Fortress Europa in the truest sense, and Britain, isolated on its island, faces a winter of hunger that will make the Blitz look like a mild inconvenience. The war has moved from a struggle for territory to a struggle for biological survival. Fast forward to the winter of 1942. The location is London, but this isn't the defiant London of the Blitz we know from history books. This is a city going quiet. The loss of Gibraltar didn't just close the Mediterranean, it opened up the Atlantic to total devastation. German U-boats no longer have to make the dangerous journey from Norway or France around the British Isles. They now operate freely from Spanish ports like Vigo and Cadiz. They refuel in the warm waters of the Azores. They hunt in wolf packs that stretch from the coast of Brazil to the Irish Sea. Britain is under a blockade that makes Napoleon's continental system look like a leaky sieve. The imports of oil from the Middle East have stopped completely. The imports of food from America are being sunk at a rate of 700,000 tons a month. In Parliament, the mood is venomous. The turnip winter has returned. The daily ration for a British adult has dropped to 800 calories, less than half of what is needed to sustain heavy labor. There are no cars on the streets. The factories are idling for lack of fuel. The heating coal has run out. People are burning furniture to stay warm. Winston Churchill, the man who promised blood, toil, tears, and sweat, is fighting for his political life. In our timeline, he survived the vote of no confidence in 1942 because the tide was turning. But here, there is no El Alamein. There is no hope of American troops landing in North Africa. In the House of Commons, the whispers grow into shouts. "We are fighting a war we cannot win," claims the opposition. Lord Halifax's argument from 1940 returns with a vengeance. Negotiate now while we still have a fleet. Churchill is ousted in a quiet coup in late 1942. He's replaced by a peace cabinet led by a pragmatist who opens back-channel talks with Berlin. They don't surrender, but they sign an armistice. Britain survives as an island, but the empire is dead. The Union Jack still flies over London, but the world it looks out upon has turned entirely gray. Now we zoom out further. It is May 8th, 1945. In our timeline, this was VE Day, the Day of Liberation. In this timeline, it is just a Tuesday. There are no American GIs in Paris. There are no Soviet tanks in Berlin. Why? Because the strategic logic of the Allied invasion fell apart the moment Franco signed that paper. Without Gibraltar and North Africa, the Allies could never launch Operation Torch. Without North Africa, they could never invade Sicily or Italy. The soft underbelly of Europe remained armored and impenetrable. And without the Mediterranean front to drain German resources, the Wehrmacht was able to focus entirely on the east and the Atlantic Wall. Imagine a map of Europe in 1950. The borders of the Greater German Reich stretch from the French coast to the Ural Mountains. Spain, under Franco, controls a vast North African empire. The Mediterranean is an internal axis waterway used to ship oil from the Middle East to the factories of the Ruhr. The United States is still in the war, but it is a lonely, cold war fought at a distance. The Atlantic Ocean has become a vast no-man's land. The U.S. Navy rules the West. The Kriegsmarine rules the East. D-Day never happened. It couldn't happen. With the Spanish coast hostile, the Atlantic Wall wasn't just a line in France, it wrapped around the entire continent. No general in Washington would authorize a suicidal landing against a Europe that had 5 years to fortify every inch of coastline. The world has settled into a terrifying stalemate. Two nuclear superpowers are emerging, not the US and the USSR, but the US and Germania. The swastika flies over the Eiffel Tower, the Parthenon, and the pyramids. And it all started because of a railway negotiation in a small town in the Pyrenees. We often think of World War II as a clash of titans, millions of men, thousands of tanks, industrial outputs pitted against each other. But the terrifying truth is that history doesn't always turn on a battlefield. Sometimes it turns on a personality, it turns on a mood. At Hendaye, the fate of the free world came down to a single boring conversation. Francisco Franco's caution saved the West.
His greed could have destroyed it. The line between our reality and this nightmare scenario wasn't a mountain range or an ocean. It was a few lines of text in a protocol that never got signed. The soft underbelly of Europe remained open only because of a diplomatic failure. But if Operation Felix had launched, the map of the 20th century would be unrecognizable. No D-Day, no liberation of the camps. Just a cold, dark silence falling over the continent, stretching from the Atlantic to the Urals. It forces us to ask the ultimate question, and I want to hear your answer in the comments below. If Britain had been neutralized in 1941 and the United States faced a fully consolidated fortress Europe with no launch pad for D-Day, would America have even tried to liberate the continent? Or would they have settled for a Cold War with the Third Reich? Could the U.S. have won alone? Let us know what you think. And if you want to explore more alternate timelines where one decision changes everything, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell. History is fragile. Handle it with care.